another episode of the Better Habits podcast, and we're here to help you with your good habits and with your bad habits. As always, trying to be actionable, trying to be practical, and trying to help you do the next step, do the action. And I'm very excited to present to you today Aviva Kamander, another coach on Coachdotme. Aviva, please, hello. Thank you for being here. And why don't you, say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, Lydia. I'm so thrilled to be here with you and very grateful to Coachdotme for having me today. I have been coaching and a psychotherapist for about 2 decades now. And I am originally a New Yorker and have stayed in New York, born in Brooklyn, first generation, and now just live about 30 minutes outside of New York City. I love working with creatives and entrepreneurs, and just because I like the way that they think differently, trying to solve problems and really make an impact on society. So that's about me.
Right. Cool. And what sort of problems or goals you're helping creatives and entrepreneurs with as a coach?
Yeah. So mostly I'm working with them on mindset, especially about sort of strengthening their optimistic and resilient mindset. Because, the idea of going into something, starting something new, takes a level of optimism. You have to believe that you're going to be able to do something. But then along the way, when we have to keep on doing things, there's a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability. Sort of being able to, pick yourself up after setbacks is sometimes can be challenging, especially when you're juggling life along with your business or your projects. So mostly what I do is work with them really a lot on understanding how compassion is an antidote, a strategy for dealing with life's difficulties, helping us manage emotions and, with care and connection.
Right. Yeah, I love the concept of self-compassion. And, I'm entrepreneur myself for the last 10 years, and I totally understand, all those struggles. And we'll park self-compassion for a sec. We'll get back to it and dive into it. But before, I just want to first. I want to mention something. I'm doing this word puzzles in New York Time app. Like every day, it's very short. Our CEO Kendra introduced it to me. Now it's a little fun every morning for me, like before wake up. But what I want to mention is it kind of counts your successful attempts as a strike. And I had, I think, 20 successful rounds in a row, and then I missed it. Like I didn't guess it, and it made my strike to 0. It was such a disappointment, and not just from a personal kind of point of view, but from a coach point of view. That made me go back and think why I hate or why I don't like this idea of strikes so much when we think about strikes as successes, because to me, I didn't break a strike. I still did the work. I tried. Now I failed, but I did my part. So they should have counted this. They should have break my strike. And it just made me think how our society, our culture is geared towards success, and how failure is heavy loaded with those emotions, especially for us entrepreneurs. So, I just want to share that with you and with the listeners, because I'm sure they feel it too. And, how would you comment on that, on the kind of general, this idea that we see so much about success and failure. It's even when it's presented, I think it's presented with the, it's never presented as it is, as kind of by itself is always covered. It's like a sandwich, It always kind of tucked under the success story. So you never see, like today, yeah. Well, actually, that was yesterday. Today I started, so I have one strike of one, but like it's never presented as it is, and it's just always covered, always kind of something shamey, something you meant to feel guilty about. What would you comment on that?
I think it's a great example, Lydia. I really appreciate you bringing it up, and I hope you write a letter to the New York Times to try to encourage them to change the way that they
I don't know if I go that far. I'm not sure.
But to answer your question, I do think that this is a pervasive way that people interpret successes and failures, so that it becomes a very kind of all or nothing way of looking at things. And especially when we are sort of under stress, we're even more likely to have a narrow focus, which is going to sort of amplify our level of stress. So it's wonderful that you have a coaching background and you're aware that it's not the end of the world and it's just one kind of event happening in your day, and you kind of can look at it with perspective. But I do think that people will look at not only their the outcomes or their achievements, but even the way they're viewing themselves, even the way, like when it comes to being an entrepreneur, you have to really be very self-motivated and kind of accountable for the work you did. So nobody else really knows what's on the agenda. And so when we aren't sort of getting to achieving as much as we set out to do, we can have this feeling of failure as well. And then that would weigh on us very heavily. So I do think we have to be extra careful in terms of how we talk to ourselves and how we think about ourselves, because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but some people are, but maybe not everyone is. But our brain actually cannot tell the difference between a real threat or an imagined or perceived threat. So that the real threat would be, we're walking in the woods and there's a predator, versus the idea like, oh, I didn't get this blog post sent out, and so now I'm a failure, my business is doomed.
Yeah.
And so we're taking in the energy of that, and sort of our nervous system is just as aroused as a result. So it's really important for people to understand and kind of be aware of maybe how society is focusing on success, but that it's not the whole picture. And that really, when it comes to, the fact that you went back on today to say, like, I'm going to keep on doing this, shows like how much, it's not really like the one day that we put in, but the long-term effort that we're trying to get to something, so if you're still enjoying these games or whatever the goals are for work.
No, it's pure enjoyment. No, you're totally right. But the kind of the gamer in me, the gamer in a good way, like I'm a very competitive person, and just a little kid in me got a little bit of disappointment because the effort was not appreciated, and just in a bigger picture, I think that's why, like, when I work with my clients and also with coaches, we talk about process-related goals, process-based goals versus, or effort-based goals versus result-oriented goals, and we highly suggest to focus on process-related goals. So your effort, that's what counts, right? And that helps. That's only part of the process, because there are days where you even not able to do the attempt, right? And you need to have the self-compassion that we're going to talk about, to be able to move past that, to move forward, and not kind of get stuck by the feeling of failure, or being a failure, which is often how we start to interpret things, from small to big, from external to internal, and the identity. And that's where the negative spiral brings us really into this dark emotion and places. Now, again, one more thing I wanted to ask, keeping things practical, how do your clients, how do they know? Like, what could be some of the alerts, some of the things, indicators for them to say, hey, well, maybe I need to go and see a coach on the, coach like you who helps with the mindset. Good mindset, for us, we understand as coaches, as experts, we understand. But for people, it's a little bit vague, I would think. So how would they know?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I should go and see a coach. What are, those indicators that they can see, concrete things in their work or life?
Mhm. Yeah, I think a big one could be if they're feeling stuck, really like noticing that they're having a lot more self-doubt than they've had before. Like there may be always some level of doubt when you're trying something new, but where you find yourself really kind of in a place where you can't seem to get yourself to get back on track. Or when it feels like you're getting lost in the weeds, spending a lot of time on something that's not very important. So that might be an indication of having a lack of clarity on like, what am I actually trying to accomplish here? So also, of course, if they're finding their mood is kind of like,
Mhm.
just kind of a little bit more like in a funk or a little more irritable. So
Mhm.
they're showing up, but really not full speed. That means maybe they're kind of lost, and just having somebody to like, talk things out and make a plan and be accountable with can really make a difference.
Yeah, no, thank you. These are really, I think these are concrete. These are
Mhm.
things that we entrepreneurs experience in our work. All right. Well, now let's talk about the self compassion. Maybe first, and again, I've learned that concept some time ago. It's brilliant. I think that should be taught at schools for our kids, along with some other things that would help them in life, much more than algebra and geometry and chemistry. And I know those are important, but I think self-compassion probably is kind of things that can be as important, if not more important. So why don't you introduce us to the concept and what it means?
Mhm. Well, so I'm going to sort of blend two theoretical approaches, if that's okay, because I really like from Paul Gilbert. He's the founder of Compassion Focused Therapy. He has his flows of compassion, and he talks about three different ways that compassion can really be expressed. And so that's compassion flowing into you. So that's when we receive compassion from others. So, maybe that's we're going through a difficult time. We have a loss in the family. We have illness. We were vulnerable. We made a big mistake, and people kind of come around and try to help us. And what is that like for us? Can we take that in from other
Mm,
people? And so that's one kind of flow. And then also another one, I'm going to sort of move quickly through these just to get to self-compassion, is also the way that we sort of are compassionate to others, because we also know that when we're offering compassion to others, that also does something good for us. Like research shows this. Most of us know this sort of intuitively. Like when we think about our neighbor who, needs something, or during COVID, we saw how people really rallied to help each other. That we can, it's actually something in our system. We have a caring system that is activated, inclined to look out for and kind of want to help others who are struggling or suffering. And so that bringing us to the third sort of flow of compassion is the self-compassion is for a lot of us very difficult. And so here, just wanted to kind of bring this approach along with Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, who talk about the mindful self-compassion that a lot of people might be familiar with, where there's these elements related to self-kindness, common humanity, and also mindfulness, And mindfulness is really a big part of self-compassion, because we need to have the awareness of what is going on, what is happening for us. But in the way that we now, once we identify, oh, I'm feeling exhausted, oh, my heart is racing, oh, I feel like I'm a failure, all these kinds of ways that we talk to ourselves, that we would then also want to think about, well, what are my options here, right? And so when you think about, well, how would a friend talk to me, right? That's one way we can think about what would I do, as well as how do I think about a friend or someone I care deeply about? What would I be saying to them? And that can even be like a concrete exercise that somebody could do, is sort of like write down exactly like what's been happening to them, and how they've been thinking about it, and then write down, well, what would they do if like their friend had the same exact situation? What would they say to them? And sometimes even seeing the difference between how we speak to ourselves and how we speak to others can be very impactful, because most of us don't speak to anyone else the way that we speak to ourselves, which is kind of interesting. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that is in our current cultures. Is not every culture that is that way, but
Mm.
certainly in Western cultures, this seems to be more of a prevalent idea. And so when we can speak to ourselves with kindness, when we can recognize we're not alone in a situation of a struggle, that this is kind of part of being alive, then we can also sort of, we're using this, we have a system in us to help us relax and respond to this care. And this, you can kind of think about it, if there's for any parents or any just really even animal lovers, like there's an inspiration that comes from when you see either a moment of beauty, of awe, of connection, or even a struggle for somebody, that some being that you love, you're kind of moved to try to do something to it. And so we want to sort of include ourselves in that. And that's really what self-compassion does.
Right, right. No, thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful, beautiful summary of it. And well, I guess couple of questions around it. Like first, entrepreneurs are often driven people, result oriented, ambitious, self-driven, right? Otherwise, it's really, hard. So those are all good qualities, but and that's my assumption. So please tell me and then the listeners if that's right or not. And so it's made it even harder for them to go into this, to lean into the concept of being compassionate to others. Yes, probably, it's possible, but to ourselves, when you're so driven and you're so result oriented, so ambitious, I find it even harder to lean into the concept. Is that true? And then if so,
Mhm.
how could it be
Yeah.
done, or what could be helpful?
Yeah, yeah. It's a great point. I do think a lot of people share your experience from what I hear. It was a very difficult transition for me, I want to say, growing up in Brooklyn. You were much more likely to be told you were a waste of oxygen than to think like, oh, be nice to yourself, speak kindly to yourself. It seemed very like otherworldly. Um, so I do understand this, and I think a lot of people actually feel cringy, like it seems like it's weak, that's for other people, it's not for me. And that's part of why the first, like those three flows that I was talking about, I think can help us also, because we can understand, well, how is it when somebody acts kind to us? Is that also difficult to take in? And sometimes that is also, other times not. But just to kind of wonder about it, because when we think about what we're saying is, we're just talking about goodwill and a general friendliness. We're not sort of getting ourselves, like, if you want to say, off the hook, where we don't have to still take care of our responsibilities. That is still part of the work. It's just that, when are we more effective? If you think about having a positive manager, a manager who's encouraging versus a manager who's highly critical and always downing you, like, who are you more motivated to work for? And so this is kind of like, what is the possible soundtrack in your mind when you are not able to be compassionate to yourself, it's often like a harsher tone and more critical, and you're already maybe working really hard and trying to do the best you can. So where are you going to get more energy? Where are you going to be more effective? So I think we could try to appeal to people who are very self-motivated and driven. I call them the dreamers and the doers, who, really want to take their life someplace. So thinking about effectiveness, I think, is one at least motivator. And then the other is actually to try it out and see, like, stay skeptical, but actually test it for yourself and see what happens. Do you lose performance? Do you wind up, feeling like you're no longer interested in what you're doing? I mean, obviously, having clarity on why you're doing what you do is very important. So when we do have a clearer sense, then the idea that we would be sort of talk to ourselves in a gentle tone, or be kinder, or be understanding when we make mistakes, or when we need to recharge and rest, wouldn't take us off our game, because we're very much connected to what we're doing. It's different if you're kind of ambivalent and not sure, but a lot of us did grow up hearing that in order, you got to be tough. You can't be like, they're
Yeah.
sort of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I don't think that the way, my understanding of self-compassion, it isn't a pass for sort of bad behavior. You're still responsible for yourself. I think that's a big piece of it. It's not like, oh, now I don't feel like it, so I don't have to do anything, and I can be terrible to people, and I don't take care of my body, I don't take care of my family. It's not an excuse, enabler.
Mhm.
It's much more a resource to be able to keep yourself going. But I understand that it's a shift in way of thinking.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And I worked with clients who are very harsh to themselves, because exactly that point, they were afraid that if they wouldn't, then they kind of like a children, they would misbehave like children when parents are not looking, when parents are not stating boundaries, when parents are kind of let them do what they want. And maybe it's a little bit about the internal kind of parent, internal child game going on. We're not gonna get too deep into that. But I did see that my clients confused that talking to yourself nicely with kind of letting yourself do whatever you want and kind of be forgiven. So I think you totally on the point that people mix that up, and they stick to this
Yeah.
kind of punitive language, harsh language, being afraid of something that is separate issue, completely different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And maybe another piece of it is that we really have, as adults, an opportunity to change the way that we walk around feeling during the day. Because when we are harsh with ourselves, when we do have a strong inner critic, it's not very pleasant. It doesn't matter even if you go on vacation. It's like you can change the environment you're in, but you're always with yourself wherever you go. So,
Yeah.
and you're really going to be living with yourself the longest out of any other relationship. So if you can sort of understand that, cultivating a positive relationship, a positive regard for yourself, which is really, what self-compassion is about. It's about having this kind of friendliness and this understanding, and just goodwill towards yourself. It's not rainbows and butterflies, so it's not also something that has to sort of be as scary in a way. But I think it's something to explore the vulnerability of what it might be like to not have this, very strong, forceful critic or harsh voice on us. Would we stop? And should we stop if that's the case? So it might be another question.
Yeah, no, totally. And that gets into another idea or thought. And I don't have I have an opinion, but I'm kind of still thinking about that. Is this idea of stoicism? that is very popular today, probably more among male than female, but in general, kind of this idea of living in a, making yourself go through some of the kind of harsh conditions, or kind of doing hard things, right?
Mhm.
Making yourself do hard things so that other things become easier, or when hard time comes, you have the resilience to go through them. Now, I always kind of, I do understand the concept of resilience, and I'm myself working on my own resilience and help my clients build resilience. But I have a little bit of issue with stoicism, and if it works for everyone. I don't know, just interested in how you feel about it, and if maybe this there is a conflict, or there is no conflict with the compassion and self-compassion concept and stoicism.
Yes, yeah. Well, so first I want to say I'm definitely not an expert in stoicism, but I do know that cognitive behavioral therapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy, which are both approaches that I studied, are kind of loosely based on the Stoic philosophies. And so I don't see it in conflict to self-compassion, but it may not include the piece around emotions. I think, given, from the time, thousands of years ago when they were talking about this, the idea of what rational thinking and reasoning was as sort of separate from emotions. And we know now that really emotions are like a lot of the fuel that kind of move us forward. It's just that we don't want our emotions really driving our decisions. But, in terms of maybe not the idea of like how we manage our thoughts, there's a lot of philosophical approaches that can be very helpful in terms of, sort of not dwelling or ruminating in our suffering, and in still trying to, there's a lot around autonomy and kind of agency in terms of
Mm-hmm.
our ability to overcome our situation and to kind of see ourselves, maybe the biggest thing that would be separate from self-compassion, or my understanding of compassion in general, and the Stoics, is this idea, because compassion comes from Buddhist philosophy and it's more from the contemplative traditions. And there's this idea of our connectivity. We're all connected. All of life, all the beings, our planet, and so that there is no separation or other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure if that could be maybe different from Stoicism, where there's this more maybe individualistic idea that we can kind of control a lot of things if we sort of manage our thoughts in a certain way. But again, I don't know if I'm actually getting that right, if as like somebody who's not.
No, it's good. It's interesting, and it's just opening up. I'm not an expert as well, but I think it's opening up for our listeners, kind of this world, and if this something they spark their curiosity. We just encourage them to go and look and read and see and yeah, study more.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely about self-compassion, compassion, and self-compassion that we talked today. And I want to kind of wrap up with something practical, something actionable, and I'll start. Some time ago, I learned Sara Blakely. I hope I pronounce it right. The founder of Spandex,
Mm-hmm.
and I was listening to her interview, and she shared a story that when she was young, when she was a child, in her family, her dad, when she and her brother would come back home in the evening, their dad would ask what they
How's
failed
everything
at.
going? Mm-hmm.
What
Yes.
they failed at. And they had to name at least one thing that they failed at. If they didn't, then he would be upset.
Mhm.
And I thought when I heard that story, I'm like, oh my God, that's like the opposite of my childhood, and probably majority of people childhood, when they come back home, you come back home, you show a plus, you've been kind of loved and hugged and kind of praised. When you come back and you say you failed at something, you know, as a minimum, you get no attention, or you get bad attention, and you like
Yeah.
that's, and then you learn that you should only bring A pluses. So my practical suggestion would be start a practice of kind of collecting failures. As an adult, now we couldn't go back, we cannot go back in time, although we can teach it to our children. That's one thing. But then, as an adult, you can do this kind of failure jar or failure, I love jars, kind of to collect things, and just because it's visual and it's fun, and you can collect pebbles, you can collect, bonbons, and, whatever fun things you want to collect. So they're colorful and they visual. Just every time you do something new, you do something unusual, you do something, and you fail at it, just, put that thing that you collected in that jar. Okay, you can do it electronically and kind of tick, kind of track those things. Anyway, just start looking. And that's what I learned, why Sarah's father was praising them for failures, because he said that meant you did something new, you did something outside your comfort zone, you stretched yourself. So every failure is a lesson, is like experiments. And the more experiments you do, the better chances of success you have, the more fun you have, the richer your experience. I mean, there are only pluses normally, from doing this more. So that would be my kind of practical small things our listeners can do. Would there be something, maybe some exercise or some practice from the self-compassion toolkit that you can share?
Sure. Well, and sort of building on how do we get to self-acceptance. So I really like this example of celebrating the failures when we're trying something new. And then it's like, so how do we actually, on a practical level, talk to ourselves? So my experience has been one of the game changers that moved me from the cringy, or even if I was already understanding, like, it's okay that people should be nice to themselves or speak to themselves gently, it still wasn't a real practice, I want to say, for me, until I learned about loving kindness practice. I don't know how familiar you are with that.
Yeah.
But so in
What
that
kind of
way,
meditation? I've tried.
yeah. So this meditation, we can also look at it as a kind of behavioral redirection of the way that we're thinking, right? Because if normally it's like, what's wrong with you? Why did you do it that way? You should have done this. You should, we're saying, may I have peace? May I be happy? May I be safe? May I know I'm strong? May I know I'm on the right track? We can really customize the mantras to be what we need. But this practice, with this sort of practicing a gentle tone to ourselves, is a way that we're almost like rehearsing and switching from what we were saying to something that we can be saying. And so again, we're not saying, if we make a mistake, it's not, oh, it wasn't my fault, which is often what happens when we're pretty harsh with ourselves. It's harder to take responsibility because we feel so defensive, because it's so crushing that we might have made a mistake, versus, oh, I'm human and I did make a mistake, but I want to either, how can I repair it? And then also, how can I sort of be okay with myself really internally in my body when I did feel like I made sort of a very big mistake or feel bad about what so those would be the exercises that I think can really support a self-compassion practice. They really work very well together. to do a loving kindness practice. And if it is too difficult to do it for yourself to start, then thinking about someone where there's no sort of ambivalence. So that could be a pet, it could be a child, it could be a partner, it could be a parent, it could be a neighbor, cousin, like somebody where it feels easy to just offer those kinds of wishes towards them.
Mhm.
So maybe as we get more used to sort of explicitly, like consciously, intentionally making those wishes for others, then maybe we can offer them to ourselves eventually.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful practice and beautiful meditation. And where just to keep it practical, where the listeners can find the words for the practice?
Oh, for loving kindness. Well,
Yeah.
so Sharon Salzberg is a wonderful teacher. That she has her books about this, but if you
Mm,
look her up, she'll have a ton of resources on loving
perfect.
practice. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. We'll put the link. We'll put the link in the description in our show notes, and we will put obviously your website and the link to Coachdotme profile for listeners. And yeah, well, if any of the conversations sparked your curiosity, if you feel like you might be experiencing something that we mentioned, especially in the beginning, some of those indicators, or you just feel like, you will benefit from talking to yourself in a more compassionate tone or words, then please go and check out Aviva's profile and coaching packages, and yeah, go and benefit from this amazing coach. Thank you so much for being with us, Aviva. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope our listeners as well, and yeah, and we'll talk to you again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.